The Gospel of the Lord according to the book of John. When the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were beside the sea, they themselves got into the boats and went to Capernaum looking for Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For it is on him that God the Father has set his seal." Then they said to him, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." So they said to him, "What sign are you going to give us then, so that we may see it and believe you? What work are you performing? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." Then Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." They said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise the Lord.
We'll read Psalm 78 responsively. So God commanded the clouds above and opened the doors of heaven.
Rain down manna upon the seas, and gave them rain from heaven.
So mortals ate the bread of angels. God provided for them food enough.
The Lord caused the east wind to blow in the heavens, and out the good of their houses.
Raining down flesh upon them like dust, and flying birds like the sand of the seas.
Letting them fall in the midst of the camp, and around about them.
So the people ate and were well filled, for God gave them what they craved. Our second reading is from Ephesians chapter 4. I, therefore, the prisoner in the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in all. But each of us was given grace according to the measure of Christ's gift. Therefore it is said, when he ascended on high, he made captivity itself a captive. He gave gifts to his people. When it says he ascended, what does it mean but that he had also descended into the lower parts of the earth? He who descends is the same one who ascended far above all the heavens, so that he might fill all things. The gifts he gave were that some would be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until all of us come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to maturity, to the measure of the full stature of Christ. We must no longer be children, tossed to and fro and blown about by every wind of doctrine, by people's trickery, by their craftiness and deceitful scheming. But speaking the truth in love, we must grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and knit together by every ligament with which it is equipped, as each part is working properly, promotes the body's growth in building itself up in love. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
story for this morning comes from 2 Samuel chapter 11. In the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to war, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. They destroyed the Ammonite armies and laid siege to the city of Rabbah. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. Late one afternoon, after his midday rest, David got out of bed and was walking on the roof of the palace. As he looked out over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. He sent someone to find out who she was, and he was told, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messengers to get her, and when she came to the place, he slept with her. She had just completed the purification rites after having her menstrual period. Then she returned home. Later, when Bathsheba discovered that she was pregnant, she sent David a message saying, "I am pregnant." Then David sent word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." So Joab sent him to David. When Uriah arrived, David asked him how Joab and the army were getting along and how their war was progressing. Then he told Uriah, "Go on home and relax." David even sent a gift to Uriah after he had left the palace. But Uriah didn't go home. He slept that night at the palace entrance with the king's palace guard. When David heard that Uriah had not gone home, he summoned him and asked, "What's the matter? Why did you go home last night after being away for so long?" Uriah replied, "The ark and the armies of Israel and Judah are living in tents. Joab and my master's men are camping in the open fields. How could I go home to wine and dine and sleep with my wife? I swear that I would never do such a thing at this moment." "Well, stay here today," David told him, "and tomorrow you may return to the army." So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem that day and the next. Then David invited him to dinner and got him drunk. But even then he couldn't get Uriah to go home to his wife. And again he slept at the palace entrance with the king's palace guard. So the next morning David wrote a letter to Joab and gave it to Uriah to deliver. The letter instructed Joab, "Station Uriah on the front lines where the battle is the fiercest. Then pull back so that he will be killed." So Joab assigned Uriah to a spot close to the city wall where he knew the enemy's strongest men were fighting. And when the enemy soldiers came out of the city to fight, Uriah the Hittite was killed along with several other Israelite soldiers. Then Joab sent a battle report to David. He told his messenger, "Report all the news of the battle to the king." He might get very angry and ask, "Why did the troops go so close to the city? Didn't they know that they were to be shooting from the walls?" Then tell him, Uriah the Hittite was killed as well. Word of God, word of life. Today we continue, as I mentioned, our summer worship series, Great Stories of the Bible. And although most of the stories that we have read are the kind of stories we read in Sunday school, this isn't one of them. So you might be asking yourself the question, why in the world is such a tragic story a great story? Well, it makes it a great story for two reasons. One, it's one of the most famous stories we have in the Bible. It's very well known that there was a thing that happened between David and Bathsheba. But also, it's a great story because of its importance, especially in this day and age. So let's unpack this story and kind of put it in context and connect it to God's greater story to discover why is it so important. David has been king. You remember that David was anointed to be king as a young man, but he had to flee because he wasn't going to become king for another 20 or so years till King Saul died. And once word got out that David was going to be the next king, David had to flee into the desert because Saul was going to try and kill him. In fact, Saul made about 27 attempts on David's life. As David was fleeing into the desert and trying to just scrape by, there were about 40 of his friends that went with him, that would be faithful to him. They would stand up, they would fight with him, they would give up their homes, their families, their jobs, their careers, everything, in order to make sure that David was able to survive the attempts on his life. One of those incredible faithful friends was Uriah. We fast forward and David is now king, and he's enjoying life as a king, shall we say. The armies are going out to do battle, and David, who's supposed to be leading them as part of the agreement, is not. He's at home, just kicking it, laying back, walking along the palace walls. One day, living the good life as, kings do. And as he's doing this, you have to imagine the way that the city of David that he built, which was the foundation of the original city of Jerusalem, how it looks. It was built on a very steep hill. And at the top of the hill, guess what? Is David's palace. And it's grand, and it's huge, and it has big walls, and a big, huge roof over top that he can walk around and look on. The rest of the city is built into the side of the hill at a very steep angle. You can go and see it today. And as you stand up on that palace, if you're lucky enough to do so, the palace itself doesn't exist today, but you can imagine how it would have looked. David has a tremendous view into every other house in the city. He's just looking straight down. And as he's looking straight down, we discover that, well, David is a peeping Tom. Bathsheba is in the privacy of her own home, taking a bath, and everything is appropriate. She's not doing anything wrong. And David is peeping, because he's got the great view and the great angle, straight into her home, and he can see her bathing. And he's like, wow, that's a good-looking woman. And then the next thing happens. So it begins with David being at home while everybody else is doing their jobs, and he is not. It moves forward with David giving into his urges and becoming a peeping Tom, but it goes even farther than that, because he calls Bathsheba to her home when she has to stay home during this period of time in her month. There's regulations about what she's supposed to do, and you might not like those regulations, but that was the culture back then. So he calls her away when she never would have left her home, calls her into the palace, and basically is going to rape her. He has power and privilege. This is not an affair. This is David using his power, his influence. Bathsheba does not have the right or the ability or anything else to say no in this situation. So David takes advantage of his power to coerce her into sleeping with him. The result is she gets pregnant. Now David's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So he calls Uriah home from the front lines, tries to get him drunk and do everything he can to get him to sleep with his wife, but he won't, because he's too much of a stand-up guy. He knows that it's the Festival of Booths, and so everybody should be living in little tents outside their house. He knows that his fellow soldiers are out on the battlefield, and it's not right for him to relax while they are having to live in tents out in a field. And so in solidarity with everybody else, he refuses to take advantage of his situation and go home and rest, because they can't. David is beside himself. What am I going to do? I can't get this guy to go home. And he's trying to cover up his own sin. He digs his hole deeper, and eventually, what does he do? He arranges for the death of Uriah to happen. David becomes a murderer. This is the great king of Israel. After this deed is done, David is going to take Bathsheba for his own wife. She doesn't have a choice in the matter. He just says, I'm king, you're mine. And then he's going to be confronted by Nathan. This is the part we didn't read. Nathan the prophet comes to David shortly after this. And he says to David, there's a story that I know about a man who did this. And he tells the story without naming names. And as David is listening to the story, he's outraged. Who is this guy that would do such a thing? Bring him before me. This guy's going to be punished, and I'll make sure that he suffers for what he's done. This is outrageous. He has this one of those righteous, indignatious moments, And Nathan drops the bombshell. In front of the entire court, Nathan says to him, you are the man. You have done this. You are a murderer. That's the story of David and Bathsheba. It's an important story. And I want to unpack it and make 4 observations for you. Why this story is so important. The first one is this, and this has been part of our, we've encountered in each of our stories almost. Sin is destructive. In fact, let me read through this thing. This will be one of our takeaways. Sin has devastating consequences. Our abuse of power destroys both our relationships and our ability to garner trust. The loss of both will cripple our faith. David is mixed up in sin. He's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. He falls to temptation, and then to cover up the temptation, things get worse and worse and worse. Sin has destructive forces. But what's more, David has power, he has privilege, he has wealth, he has standing, and the abuse of that power leads to horrible things happening and victimizing people who do not have power. It's a very important story for us today about how we use the power and the privilege that God has given us. There's this quote, and this is by Eugene Peterson, and I love this quote. He's talking about this moment with David and how Nathan confronts him. This is the gospel focus. You are the man. You are the woman. The gospel is never about somebody else. It's always about you, about me. The gospel is never a truth in general. It's always a truth in specific. The gospel is never a commentary on our ideas, our culture, our conditions. It's always about actual persons, actual pain, actual trouble, actual sin. You, me, who you are and what we've done, who I am and what I've done. It's both easy and common to lose this focus, to let the gospel blur into generalized pronouncements, boozy cosmic opinions, religious indignation. That's what David is doing in the story. Listening to his pastor preach a sermon about somebody else and getting all worked up about that somebody else's sin. That's someone else's plight. That kind of religious response is worthless. When we encounter God's truth, when we encounter these stories, we have to realize that God is speaking to us. Too often in our minds we think, yeah, that person over there, that public figure, yeah, he's just like David, yeah. But it's about us. And it's about how we abuse our privilege, and it's about how we victimize other people. The gospel is always communicating to us. This is a horrible story about how faithful people are victimized because one person takes power and gets drunk on it. A woman is raped. A baby dies. A man is killed. A best friend is killed just to cover up sin. And this is what happens when we hide our sins. When we allow our sins just to remain in that secret place, we don't let anybody else see it, and we play with them like we play with fire. Lives destroyed, because it's never just about us, in the sense of sin has consequences that affect everyone around us. And when we read God's word, we have to personalize it. We have to take it to heart, because God almost always is speaking to us, not to someone else, as we listen to God's word. Bathsheba is one of those victims. And she is a person that didn't have power, didn't have control. She's just basically going along with whatever David tells her she must do. One of the powerful moments of the story is also the fact that God sees what's going on. God does not agree with it. God does not uphold it. God sees how Bathsheba is being victimized. And we honor Bathsheba as a victim every time we stand up against the abuse of power, the abuse of privilege, the abuse of people who think that because they have money or because they have a position of authority, they can take what they want from anyone at any time. And that is wrong. That is what destroys our community, our relationships. And when we put ourselves like Nathan, and we're willing to confront those who are abusing power, we are honoring Bathsheba and every other victim of abuse that is out there. But what's more in this story is that we see what God's greater desire. Because when Nathan confronts David, we see why David is considered such a good king. Because obviously, he's done horrible things, including murder, including rape, including being a peeping Tom. He's done, and this is just the beginning of the list, folks. So if we sat and looked over the whole life of David, this isn't the only time he's going to murder someone. This isn't the only time he's going to be unfaithful. Why is David considered a man after God's own heart? Why is David considered such an incredible person? And King Saul, one before him, was condemned for all the bad things he did. And it's this moment when Nathan confronts him. David has many ways he could respond. He's the king. He has power. He is incredibly well-liked. He's incredibly popular. He could have had Nathan killed that very moment. He could have done whatever he wanted to cover. He did do whatever he wanted to cover it up. But at this point, it becomes public. It's So how does David respond? And this is the key thing. David repents. David just doesn't say, oh, I feel sorry, I feel bad. You're right, Nathan. I did it. My bad. I'll do better. No, he actually truly repents. He actually changes his life and accepts responsibility for what he has done. And he's willing to pay the consequences. He's willing to do what he has to do to make it right. He repents to the extent that he can. He can never give Uriah's life back. He can never take back what he did to Bathsheba. There's a lot that he cannot make right, but he's willing to do what he can do, and he's willing to change his ways. And that's what sets David apart. Always is his willingness to repent. And we understand from the story that God is more interested in redeeming us than God is in punishing us. That's why God waited 40 years to remove Saul, even though Saul was a horrible king. This is why God's not going to just remove David from the kingship because, well, guess what? No matter who else he puts there, they're going to be a bad king probably as well. They're going to have their own sins because we're all like David in that sense. We're not any better than David. David shows us something that's important. David repents. And in that we see God's greater desire is to redeem us, not to punish us. That's how this story so powerfully connects us to Jesus. Because God is trying to communicate to Israel, to the world around them, that God longs to redeem us, to change us, to make us into the people God created us to be, and to not allow us to wallow just in sin and experience punishment. That's not what God wants. That's one of the most powerful takeaways that we have from this story. The last observation is this. David, when he was running for his life, when he was living in poverty, when he was living in caves in the desert, and he had to take care of his men, and he had to survive day to day. They were hard times for David. But one of the powerful parts about David's story, is you remember a couple years ago when I preached on David, I made a big deal about this, but it's important to remind us. While David was running away and living in the desert in caves, barely getting by, what did David do? What's the powerful thing he did? There were a number of other widows and orphans who were being abused by Saul. So what does David do? He takes them in. One of the worst things you could do if you're running for your life is to take on a lot of excess baggage. But that's exactly what David does. He starts providing protection for all these people that have been displaced by Saul. And he begins providing food and places and safety for them. And he's got to move them. And every time Saul finds him and he comes, there's about 400 people that wind up, 400 or 500 people that join his entourage. All of them needy people that can't fend for themselves. And David has to provide for them. All while trying to move and stay one step ahead of Saul. Those were tough times. But in those tough times, David was doing a magnificent thing. He wasn't thinking of his own safety. He wasn't thinking about how he could best provide for himself. He was putting himself out there and caring for those people who desperately needed someone to watch out for them. The vulnerable, the displaced. That's what David was doing. And it's an incredible story. It's one of the high points of David's life. David becomes king. He gets his answer. He gets his dream. He has wealth. He has power. He's got people to feed him. He's got an unlimited table. Life is great. And what does David do? He falls into temptation that he's not able to handle on his own. He becomes a pervert. He becomes a rapist. He becomes a murderer. He becomes a horrible father. I could crush your hearts right now if I actually told you the stories about David as a father. He was a horrible father. Why? I don't know. Maybe he got his dreams come true, and he got all his blessings, and he got to be king, and he got all this wealth, and all of a sudden, he had temptations he couldn't deal with, and sin exploded uncontrollably in his life. Think about that when you think about what you desire most in your life. When you get frustrated because you don't have that new car, or your neighbor has that thing that you've always wanted, or your brother-in-law, your sister-in-law, they get the pool in the backyard, or think about that when you want that new job, and you so desperately think you want it, and you pray about it, and you don't get it, and you get angry at God. David is this example of a person who had nothing, but was excelling in his calling. And when he got everything, I mean wealth, everything falls apart for David. Think about that. Maybe, and it was God's plan for David to become king. It was his calling. He was supposed to become king. But in our lives, there's a tale there, isn't there? There's a lesson. Maybe the kind of success we yearn for is not the best thing for us. To be able to be the people God created us to be able to find the calling that will give us purpose in our lives. It's a very, very cautious tale. And it's a warning, I think, to all of us. Amen? Our takeaways for today. Remember, our takeaways are the biblical truths that we discover in God's Word, that we hook our faith on, and we take home and we think about throughout the week. There are 4 of them this week. And the first one is this. Sin has devastating consequences. Our abuse of power destroys both our relationships and our ability to garner trust. The loss of both cripple our faith. It's an important thing to remember throughout the week. Secondly, we honor Bathsheba by naming sin for what it is, by standing up to injustice, assault, and abuse and power in all of its forms. And that's important that we take on that role. Someone has to speak for the victims, the people who don't have power, those who are abused. Thirdly, God's greater desire is to redeem people rather than to see them punished for their deeds. Both the good news and the offense of the gospel is that God forgives the worst of our sins, including what David did. And lastly, material success and safety in David's life brings about temptations that David is not equipped to handle. This leads to devastating sins in his life. Let's stand for our song of the day.